The stars had never seemed so quiet as they did on the day humanity first met the Galactic Council. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the front window of his ship's bridge, looking out at the empty space ahead. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations, checking systems and making sure everything was ready. They had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this meeting point, and now they were finally here. The UNSC Constellation was the largest ship humanity had ever built. She stretched more than 4 kilometers from front to back, with a hull so wide that smaller ships could have landed on her deck. Her metal skin was dark gray, covered with sensors and weapon ports, but what made her special wasn't her size or her weapons. It was what she carried inside. "Sir, I'm getting signals from the Council ships," said Katie Pierce from her station. She was young, maybe 25, with short red hair and sharp green eyes. "They're asking us to slow down and prepare for visual contact." Morrison nodded. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many battles. "Slow to 1/4 speed. Let them get a good look at us." The Constellation's engines quieted, and the massive ship began to drift forward more slowly. Morrison watched as small points of light appeared in the distance. They grew larger, becoming sleek silver ships that looked like needles cutting through space. There were 12 of them arranged in a careful pattern. "Those are Vaxil cruisers," said Lieutenant Greg Palmer from the tactical station. He was a stocky man with dark skin and clever eyes. "About 200 meters each. Fast ships, good weapons, the Council's best." Morrison smiled slightly. "They look like toys next to us." It was true. Even one of the Constellation's smaller escort ships was bigger than the Council cruisers. But Morrison knew that size wasn't everything. The Council had been exploring space for thousands of years. They knew things humanity was still learning. The communication system beeped and Katie looked up. "Sir, they're hailing us, audio and video." "Put it through," Morrison said. The main screen flickered and showed the inside of one of the alien ships. The creature looking back at them was unlike anything most humans had ever seen in person. Ambassador Kelthrin was a Vaxil, which meant he looked somewhat like a tall, thin person covered in pale blue skin. But he had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern on his face, and his mouth was a complex thing with multiple parts. When he spoke, a computer translated his clicking sounds into English. "Greetings, Captain Morrison of Earth," Kelthrin said. His voice through the translator was smooth and calm. "We welcome you to this historic meeting. The Galactic Council has reviewed your people's application for membership. We are eager to learn more about humanity." Morrison straightened in his chair. "Thank you, Ambassador. We're honored to be here. Earth is ready to join the galactic community and contribute to the peace and prosperity of all species." Kelthrin's eyes blinked one at a time, which Morrison had learned meant he was thinking carefully. "Yes, well, there are some questions we must address first. We have been observing your ships and we find them quite unusual. The vessel you command is enormously large, larger than anything we have seen before except for space stations." "The Constellation is one of our fleet carriers," Morrison explained. "She's designed to operate far from Earth for long periods." "A carrier?" Kelthrin repeated. "This term is not familiar to us. What does it mean?" Morrison had expected this question. He glanced at Palmer, who brought up a display on the main screen. It showed a diagram of the Constellation with various sections highlighted. "A carrier is a mobile base," Morrison said. "She doesn't fight directly very often. Instead, she carries smaller ships that do the fighting. Fighter craft, bombers, gunships. The Constellation can deploy hundreds of them at once." The silence from the Council ships was complete. Morrison could see other aliens crowding around behind Kelthrin, all of them staring at the display. One of them, a reptilian creature with green scales, pushed forward. "Hundreds," the creature said. "You carry hundreds of combat ships inside one vessel." 640 Raptor interceptors, Morrison said, reading from Palmer's display. 220 Hammer bombers, 80 Spear gunships, plus support craft, shuttles, and rescue ships. The Constellation also houses 12,000 crew members, including all the pilots, mechanics, and support staff needed to keep the fighters flying. Kelthrin's pale skin seemed to get even paler. "This is not possible. The resource cost alone would be staggering. How many of these carriers does Earth possess? Morrison kept his face neutral. The first expeditionary group, which is what we're calling this diplomatic mission, has 12 fleet carriers like the Constellation. We also have 18 light carriers that carry about 300 fighters each. Across all of Earth's Navy, we currently operate 47 carriers, with 8 more being built in our shipyards. The screen erupted in noise as the aliens all started talking at once. Kelthrin held up his hands, trying to restore order. The reptilian creature, who Morrison now learned was Coordinator Vren of the Thex hierarchy, was shaking his head in what looked like disbelief. "This makes no sense," Vren said. His voice was deep and rough. "The Council has refined our military doctrine over 12,000 years. We build ships that are fast, efficient, and powerful. Each ship is a complete fighting unit. Your approach seems wasteful and overly complicated." Lieutenant Lisa Grant spoke up from her station. She was the operations officer, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. "With respect, Coordinator, our doctrine has been refined over 300 years of constant warfare. We didn't choose this approach because it seemed interesting. We chose it because it works." Morrison nodded. "Let me show you something. Palmer, bring up the training simulation." The display changed to show a battle scenario. On one side were 20 Council-style cruisers, each one a sleek and deadly warship. On the other side was a single carrier with her escort ships. "This is a simulation we run with new pilots," Morrison explained. "The scenario is simple: 20 enemy cruisers against one carrier group. Watch what happens." The simulation played out on the screen. The Council cruisers moved forward in a tight formation, their weapons charging. The carrier hung back, protected by 4 smaller escort ships. Then suddenly, the carrier's side opened up and fighters began pouring out like angry bees from a hive. Within seconds, there were hundreds of small craft filling the space between the two forces. They moved in coordinated groups, each squadron working together. The cruisers opened fire, destroying some of the fighters, but there were too many targets. The fighters swarmed around the cruisers, hitting them from every angle at once. "Notice how the cruisers can only shoot at 1 or 2 targets at a time," Morrison pointed out. "Their weapons are designed to fight other large ships, but fighters are small and fast. While they're trying to hit the fighters, our bombers slip through and attack their engines and weapons." In the simulation, the battle was over in less than 10 minutes. All 20 cruisers were disabled or destroyed. The carrier had lost about 60 fighters, but it still had hundreds more ready to launch. Kelthrin watched the simulation end with a troubled expression. "But this is only a simulation. Real battle is far more chaotic." "You're right," Morrison agreed. "Real battle is messier. That's why we train constantly. Our pilots fly practice missions every single day. Our crews can launch and recover fighters in their sleep. We've been doing this for so long that it's become second nature." Katie brought up another display. "This shows our actual combat record from the colonial wars. Over a 50-year period, Earth's carriers fought in 247 major engagements. Our win rate was 92%. Vren leaned closer to his screen. "Who were you fighting?" "Other humans," Morrison nodded slowly. "Yes. When humanity first spread out to other star systems, we had disagreements about governance and resources. There were wars, terrible ones, but we learned from them. We learned that the side with the most flexible forces usually wins. We learned that being able to hit the enemy from multiple directions at the same time is better than having one really powerful ship. And we learned that pilots who survive a battle and get back to their carrier can fly again the next day, while a destroyed cruiser is gone forever." Lisa added, "Our carriers are designed to be resilient. If you damage one section, the others keep working. We have backup systems for our backup systems. A carrier can lose half her fighter bays and still operate. Try that with a traditional warship." Kelthrin was quiet for a long moment. His 4 eyes moved independently, looking at different parts of the displays. "What you are describing is a complete revolution in military thinking. The Council's fleets are built around the idea that each ship must be powerful enough to win its own battles. You build ships that are powerful only when working together." "Exactly," Morrison said. "One fighter alone is weak. 10 fighters together are dangerous. 100 fighters working as a team can take down almost anything. And a carrier can send out wave after wave of them, all day long if necessary. Another alien pushed into view on the screen. This one looked almost human, except for the silver color of her skin and the fact that she had no hair at all. "I'm Speaker Lyra of the Meridian Union. I must ask, Captain Morrison, how do you coordinate so many small craft in battle? The communication requirements alone must be overwhelming." Palmer grinned and pulled up another diagram. "That's actually one of our strengths. Each fighter has a computer that links to the carrier's main tactical system. The pilots can see what every other pilot in their squadron sees. They can coordinate attacks without even talking, just by watching the shared display. And our squadron leaders are trained to think independently. They don't wait for orders from the carrier. They see the battle developing and react immediately." Morrison stood and walked closer to the screen. "Ambassador Kelthrin, I understand this is a lot to take in. The Council has been using one type of warfare for thousands of years. We're showing you something completely different, but I want to be clear about something important. We didn't bring our carriers here to threaten anyone. We brought them because they're what we have. This is how Earth defends itself and projects power across space." Vren's claws tapped against something off-screen. "How many pilots does Earth have?" "To operate so many fighters, you must train thousands of them. In the first expeditionary group, we have about 8,000 active pilots," Lisa said. "Across the entire Navy, we have approximately 200,000 qualified spacecraft pilots, plus another 100,000 in reserves who fly civilian craft but maintain their military certification." The number seemed to hit the aliens like a physical blow. Kelthrin's mouth parts moved in a way that the translator couldn't interpret. Speaker Lyra put her hand over her face. Vren just stared. 200,000 combat pilots, Vren finally said. "The entire Thex military has perhaps 10,000 ship captains total. You have 20 times that many people trained to fly combat spacecraft." Morrison nodded. "Our population is about 30 billion across all our colonies. We have a lot of people, and many of them want to serve. Being a pilot is considered one of the highest honors in Earth's military. The training is hard, but there's never a shortage of volunteers." Katie received another message and read it quickly. "Sir, the Council is requesting permission to send an inspection team aboard the Constellation. They want to see the fighter bays." Morrison considered this. It was a reasonable request and he had nothing to hide. "Granted. Tell them they can send one representative from each species. We'll give them a full tour." 2 hours later, Morrison was walking through the Constellation's main hangar bay with a group of very overwhelmed aliens. The bay was enormous, stretching for hundreds of meters in every direction. Fighters sat in neat rows, 3 levels deep on massive racks. Crews in colored uniforms moved between the craft, performing maintenance and loading weapons. Kelthrin stopped next to a Raptor interceptor and stared up at it. The fighter was small compared to the carrier, only about 15 meters long, but it was sleek and deadly looking. Its wings were swept back, and missile pods hung from hardpoints on its belly. "This single craft," Kelthrin said quietly, "has more firepower than some of our courier ships." A pilot walked by, saw the aliens, and nodded respectfully before continuing to her fighter. She was young, maybe 22, with dark hair tied back. She climbed into the cockpit like she'd done it 1,000 times before, which she probably had. Morrison noticed Kelthrin watching her. "That's Lieutenant Claire Hudson. She's been flying for 3 years, has 200 combat hours logged, and leads a flight of 4 fighters. She's one of about 600 pilots on this carrier alone." Vren walked over to where a crew was loading missiles onto a bomber. The weapons were sleek cylinders about 4 meters long. "What are these?" "Hammer torpedoes," the crew chief explained. He was a burly man named Pete Rogers, and he'd been working on carriers for 15 years. "Each one can crack a cruiser's shields and cause serious damage to the hull. That bomber carries 8 of them." Vren did some quick math in his head and his eyes widened. 8 torpedoes per bomber, 220 bombers on this ship. That's over 1,700 anti-ship missiles you can deploy in a single strike. Pete nodded cheerfully. "Yes, sir, and we can reload and launch a second strike within 90 minutes. Third strike after that if needed. We practice it all the time." Speaker Lyra was examining the fighter racks, trying to understand how they worked. "How quickly can you launch these craft?" Morrison smiled. "Katie, could you ask the flight boss to run a full launch drill?" "Yes, sir," Katie said into her communicator. Klaxons began to sound throughout the hangar. Crew moved with sudden purpose, their casual attitudes replaced by focused intensity. The aliens backed up against a wall as fighters began to move. The launch system was a marvel of engineering. Massive rails grabbed each fighter and moved it toward the launch catapults. The catapults were long tracks that ran along the carrier's sides, designed to throw fighters out into space at high speed. The aliens watched in amazement as fighters began launching every few seconds, one after another in a continuous stream. "From standby to full launch takes about 12 minutes, Morrison explained over the noise. "We can put 400 fighters into space in that time. The other 240 launch from the secondary bays, which takes a bit longer." Kelthrin watched a Raptor streak down the catapult and shoot out into space. This level of coordination, the training required, the logistics of maintaining so many craft, it's staggering. "It's what we do," Morrison said simply. "Every person on this ship has a job, and they know it perfectly. The pilot trusts the crew chief to maintain her fighter. The crew chief trusts the supply officer to get him the right parts. The supply officer trusts the carrier's captain to keep the ship safe while they work. It's a chain of trust that goes from the newest recruit all the way up to me." The launch drill completed, and the hangar began to quiet down. The fighters that had been launched were now circling the carrier in formation, waiting for the order to land and be recovered. Lisa pulled up a display on a portable screen. "Want to see the recovery operation? It's just as impressive." The aliens watched as the fighters began returning. They came in groups of 4, lining up behind the carrier. One by one, they approached the landing deck, a massive opening at the Constellation's stern. As each fighter touched down, it was grabbed by an arresting cable that stopped it quickly. Then the fighter was immediately pulled off to the side, making room for the next one. 18 seconds per fighter, Lisa noted. "We can recover the entire wing in less than 20 minutes. Then the maintenance crews inspect each one, refuel them, rearm them, and have them ready to launch again within an hour." Vren shook his head slowly. "The efficiency is remarkable. But I must ask, what happens when a fighter is shot down? You speak of sending wave after wave, but surely you lose many craft in battle." Morrison's face became more serious. "We do lose fighters, yes. Every battle has casualties, but that's where our doctrine really shows its strength. See that ship out there?" He pointed through a window at one of the smaller vessels escorting the Constellation. "That's a rescue and recovery ship. Her only job is to pick up pilots whose fighters get destroyed. Every pilot wears a suit with a powerful beacon. When their fighter is hit badly, they eject. The recovery ship tracks them down and brings them back to the carrier." "And then?" Kelthrin asked. "And then we give them a new fighter and they go back out," Morrison said. "A pilot who survives a battle is worth more than gold to us. They have experience. They know what real combat feels like. We can build a new fighter in a few weeks. It takes years to train a good pilot." Katie spoke up. "During the Battle of New Vancouver, Captain Morrison's previous carrier lost 73 fighters in one engagement. We recovered 68 pilots. By the next day, 50 of them were flying again in replacement fighters. The experience they gained from that battle helped us win 3 more battles in the following months." Speaker Lyra seemed to understand now. "You don't just have more fighters. You have a system that preserves your most valuable resource, which is the trained people who fly them." "Exactly," Morrison said. "The Council builds wonderful ships, and I'm sure your captains are brave and skilled. But when you lose a ship, you lose everything. The captain, the crew, all their experience and training. When we lose a fighter, we usually get the pilot back. They learn from what went wrong, and they don't make the same mistake twice." The tour continued for another hour. Morrison showed them the pilot-ready rooms where pilots waited for their assignments. He showed them the tactical center, where officers coordinated entire fighter wings during battle. He showed them the massive supply areas where thousands of spare parts were stored and tracked. Every system was designed to keep the fighters flying, no matter what. Finally, they returned to the bridge. Kelthrin looked exhausted, overwhelmed by everything he'd seen. Captain Morrison, I need to be honest with you. When the Council first learned of Earth's military, we were concerned. We saw large ships and assumed you were building them to threaten others. Now I understand we were completely wrong about what we were seeing. You weren't wrong to be concerned, Morrison said gently. A military this large could be dangerous in the wrong hands, but Earth learned some hard lessons during our wars. We learned that the best defense is not to threaten others, but to be so strong that no one wants to threaten you. Our carriers aren't built to conquer. They're built to protect. Vren crossed his arms. But you could conquer if you chose to. The military power you command is vastly greater than anything the Council possesses. Morrison nodded slowly. We could, you're right, but we won't. Earth is seeking membership in the Council because we want partners, not subjects. We want to trade, to share knowledge, to help each other explore the galaxy. Our carriers give us the confidence to approach you as equals, not as supplicants begging for protection. Kelthrin seemed to think about this for a long time. Finally, he spoke. The Council will need to discuss this at length. Your application for membership raises many questions, not just about military matters but about trade, immigration, cultural exchange, and many other issues. But I can tell you personally, Captain Morrison, that I believe Earth will be a valuable member of the galactic community. Your people think differently than we do, and that difference will make us all stronger. Thank you, Ambassador, Morrison said. We look forward to your decision. As the Council ships prepared to leave, Kelthrin had one more question. Captain Morrison, you mentioned that the first expeditionary group has 12 carriers. Where are the others? Morrison smiled. They're spread out across this sector, conducting their own diplomatic missions and patrols. We thought it would be overwhelming to bring all of them to this first meeting. We wanted to show you what we can do, not scare you. Kelthrin's eyes all blinked at once, which Morrison had learned meant he was amused. If you were trying not to scare us, Captain, I'm not sure you succeeded. 1 carrier is impressive enough. 12 is concerning. Then I probably shouldn't mention the second expeditionary group, Morrison said with a slight grin, or the 3rd through 8th groups that are deployed along our border regions. We like to be thorough. The color drained from Kelthrin's face again. How many carriers does Earth actually have deployed right now? Morrison glanced at Lisa, who pulled up the current fleet status. 47 carriers are operational and deployed. 8 are in various stages of construction. We also have about 30 older carriers that have been converted to transport and supply roles. The silence from the Council ships was absolute. Finally, Speaker Lyra spoke. Earth has been in space for how long? Had interstellar capability for about 300 years, Katie answered. We've been building carriers for about 280 of those years. And in that time, Lyra continued, you've built over 80 carriers and trained hundreds of thousands of pilots. The dedication to this doctrine is absolute, Morrison nodded. When humanity finds something that works, we tend to stick with it. Carriers work. They've worked in every conflict we've had. We see no reason to change our approach now. As the Council ships finally departed, Morrison watched them go from the observation deck. Palmer came to stand beside him. Think they'll accept us, sir? Palmer asked. Morrison was quiet for a moment. They'll accept us. They're practical people. They can see that trying to fight us would be a disaster and that having us as allies would be an advantage. Plus, I think Kelthrin genuinely likes us. Even though we scared him half to death, Palmer said with a chuckle. Especially because of that, Morrison replied. Fear creates respect as long as it's paired with trust. They're afraid of our military power, but they trust that we won't misuse it. That's a good foundation for an alliance. Katie called out from the bridge. Sir, we're receiving a message from the Roosevelt. Admiral Clark wants to know if the Council delegation visited them yet. Morrison smiled. Tell her they just left, and warn her that they're probably in shock. Go easy on them. As the Constellation's engines powered up for the journey to the next Council world, Morrison thought about the future. Humanity was about to join something much larger than itself, a community of species that had been exploring the galaxy for thousands of years before Earth even invented the wheel. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts and misunderstandings, but Earth was ready. Earth had its carriers, its pilots, its crews who could perform miracles of coordination and skill. Earth had learned from centuries of warfare and had developed a military doctrine that was uniquely its own. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had known for generations. In space, the side that could be everywhere at once would always have the advantage, and humanity's carriers could be everywhere, with enough fighters to fill the sky and enough trained pilots to fly them all. The age of the carrier had come to the stars, and nothing would ever be the same. 3 months had passed since humanity's first meeting with the Galactic Council. The diplomatic talks were going well, though slowly. The Council was cautious, asking endless questions about Earth's intentions and capabilities. Captain Jake Morrison had spent most of that time traveling between Council worlds, showing the constellation to various species and answering the same questions over and over again. He was getting tired of diplomatic missions. Morrison was a military man at heart, and he preferred action to endless talking. So when the emergency call came through, he was almost relieved. "Sir, we're receiving a distress signal from the Kelvin mining colony," Katie Pierce said from her station. Her voice had that tight quality that meant something was very wrong. "They're under attack." Morrison was out of his chair immediately. "Put it on screen. Who's attacking them?" The main display showed static-filled images from the colony. Between the interference, Morrison could see buildings on fire and people running in panic. Then he saw the attackers and his blood went cold. They looked like insects, but each one was as big as a car. They had 6 legs that ended in sharp points, and their heads were covered in too many eyes. Their bodies were covered in black armor that seemed to absorb light. Morrison had seen pictures of them in the Council's briefing materials. "Krynax," Greg Palmer said grimly from Tactical. The Council's worst nightmare. Morrison had read about the Krynax. They were a hive mind, all of them controlled by a central intelligence. They appeared every few decades from the dark spaces between the galaxy's spiral arms. They attacked colonies, stripped them of resources, and then disappeared again. The Council had been fighting them for thousands of years and had never found a way to stop them permanently. "How many ships?" Morrison demanded. Palmer's hands moved quickly across his controls. "Sensors are reading 212 vessels. Most are frigate-sized, about 150 meters long, but there are 7 larger ones, probably their equivalent of battleships. They're about 500 meters each." Katie looked up from her station. "Sir, the Colony Defense Force engaged them. There's nothing left of it. The Krynax destroyed 12 Council ships in about 10 minutes. The colony is trying to evacuate, but there are 200 civilian transports still on the ground loading people." Morrison felt the old familiar feeling settling into his gut. It was the feeling he got before every battle, a mixture of fear and excitement and determination. "How long until Council reinforcements arrive?" 6 hours, Katie said. "The nearest Council fleet is coming as fast as they can, but they're too far away." 6 hours. The colony didn't have 6 hours. Morrison looked at the tactical display, seeing the Krynax ships moving through the system like a swarm of locusts. They were systematic, destroying everything in their path. "How far are we from Kelvin?" he asked. 32 minutes at maximum speed, Palmer replied. Morrison made his decision. "Sound general quarters. I want every pilot in their fighter within 5 minutes. Contact the Lincoln and the Roosevelt. Tell them to form up on our flanks and prepare for combat operations. All escort ships to screening formation." The bridge exploded into controlled chaos. Alarms began sounding throughout the massive carrier. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Crew members ran to their battle stations, their training taking over. In the pilot-ready rooms throughout the ship, hundreds of men and women grabbed their flight suits and helmets. They'd been training for this moment for years. Some of them had seen combat before during Earth's wars. Others were about to experience their first real battle. Commander Danny Shaw was one of the experienced ones. He'd flown fighters for 8 years and had survived the brutal Battle of New Vancouver. As he pulled on his helmet and headed for the hangar, his hands were steady. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. The hangar deck was organized chaos. Crew members in different colored uniforms swarmed over the fighters, doing final checks and loading weapons. The deck boss, a loud woman named Chief Carla Martinez, was shouting orders and making sure everything happened in the right sequence. Shaw climbed into his Raptor interceptor and began running through his pre-flight checklist. His crew chief, a young man named Tony Lee, gave him a thumbs up from below, Everything was ready. "All pilots, this is Captain Morrison," the shipwide channel crackled. Shaw could hear the determination in Morrison's voice. "The Krynax have hit Kelvin Colony. There are 200 civilian ships on the ground trying to evacuate. Those ships are full of families, children, ordinary people who just want to live their lives. The Council fleet won't arrive for 6 hours. We're all these people have. I know you're ready. I know you'll do your duty. But more than that, I know you'll bring each other home. Trust your training, trust your wingman, and let's show the Krynax why they should have stayed in the dark." Morrison out. Shaw felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. This was what all the training was for. "All squadrons, commence launch operations," Commander Helen Torres ordered from the carrier's Air Wing headquarters. Torres was a veteran pilot herself, and now she coordinated all the fighters from her command center deep inside the constellation. The launch catapults roared to life. Fighters began shooting out of the carrier's sides like bullets from a gun. Shaw felt his Raptor lock into the catapult, felt the acceleration press him back into his seat, and then he was in space. All around him, hundreds of other fighters were forming up into their squadrons. It was a beautiful and terrifying sight. Shaw had been part of large launches before, but this was different. This time it wasn't a drill. "Gold Squadron, form on me," Shaw ordered his pilots. 16 Raptor interceptors moved into formation around him, their movements precise and practiced. On the Constellation's bridge, Morrison watched the tactical display with the calm expression of a man who had commanded carriers for 20 years. The display showed his fighters launching in a steady stream. 400 interceptors were already in space, with bombers and gunships following behind them. "Status on the Lincoln and Roosevelt?" he asked. "Both carriers report ready to launch," Katie replied. "They're waiting for your order." Morrison nodded. "Tell them to launch everything. I want 1,200 fighters in space within the next 8 minutes. Lisa Grant looked up from her operations console. "Sir, we'll be outnumbered by their ships almost 2 to 1. Morrison smiled slightly. "But we'll outnumber their fighters by about 1,200 to whatever they have. That's what matters." The Constellation and her sister carriers jumped into faster-than-light travel, heading toward the Kelvin system. The fighters hung in formation around the massive ships, looking like clouds of tiny stars. Inside his fighter, Shaw checked his weapons for the 10th time. His Raptor carried 4 medium-range missiles, 2 short-range missiles, and a rapid-fire cannon. It wasn't much compared to a capital ship, but 16 Raptors working together could do serious damage. "All fighters prepare to exit jump in 30 seconds, Tor's voice came through. "Gold and silver wings, you're hitting the Krynax frigate formations. Bronze and iron wings protect the civilian ships. Hammer bombers, those big battleships, are your targets. Remember your training and watch each other's backs." Shaw took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the flight controls. "Gold Squadron, weapons hot. Stay tight and follow my lead." The carriers dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and suddenly the Kelvin system was all around them. Shaw's sensors immediately lit up with targets. Krynax ships were everywhere, their organic-looking hulls pulsing with sick green light. Below them, on the colony world, he could see the civilian transports trying to take off while Krynax ground forces attacked them. "All wings, break and attack," Torres ordered. 1,200 human fighters scattered in every direction, moving to their assigned targets with practiced precision. Shaw led Gold Squadron straight toward a cluster of Krynax frigates that were firing on the civilian ships. "Gold 2, Gold 3, take the left target. Gold 4 through 7, center target. The rest of you on me," Shaw called out. The Krynax ships saw them coming and began turning their weapons toward the fighters. Plasma bolts filled the space between them, bright green energy that could vaporize a fighter in one hit. But the fighters were small and fast, weaving through the incoming fire. Shaw lined up his first target and fired 2 missiles. They streaked across the distance and slammed into the Krynax frigate's side, punching through the organic armor and exploding deep inside. The frigate shuddered and began to drift. "Gold 7, I got one," his wingman, Lieutenant Amy Carter, shouted over the radio. She was young, only 23, but she was one of the best pilots in the squadron. "Stay focused, Gold 7, Shaw replied. "There's plenty more where that came from." All around him, the battle was unfolding in 3 dimensions. Human fighters swarmed the Krynex ships like angry hornets. The aliens were trying to fight back, but their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat. They couldn't track the small, fast-moving fighters effectively. On the Constellation's bridge, Morrison watched the tactical display with satisfaction. His fighters were doing exactly what they'd been trained to do. They were overwhelming the enemy with numbers and coordination. "Sir, the Krynex are launching their own fighters," Palmer warned. Morrison leaned forward to look at the display. Sure enough, the 7 Krynex battleships were opening bays and releasing smaller craft. They looked like flying beetles, each one about the same size as a human fighter. "How many?" Morrison asked. "About 300 total," Palmer said. "They're moving to engage our interceptor wings." Morrison nodded. "Tell Torres to detail 2 interceptor wings to handle them. Keep the rest on the frigates." The space between the fleets became a chaotic swirl of dogfighting spacecraft. Human raptors tangled with Krynex fighters in a deadly dance. The Krynex had an advantage because all their fighters were controlled by a single hive mind. They could coordinate perfectly without any communication. But the human pilots had something the Krynex didn't. They had individual creativity and years of training. Each pilot could think for themselves, react to unexpected situations, and come up with solutions on the fly. Shaw found himself in a turning fight with 2 Krynex fighters. They were trying to get behind him, working together with perfect synchronization. But Shaw had been flying fighters since he was 18 years old. He knew every trick. He cut his engine power and let his Raptor drift for just a second. The Krynex fighters overshot him, suddenly appearing in front of his nose. Shaw lit up his engine again and fired his cannon, shredding one of the alien fighters. The other one tried to turn, but Amy Carter came screaming in from the side and took it down with a missile. "Thanks, Gold 7, Shaw said. "Anytime, lead," Amy replied. While the fighters battled in space, the Hammer bombers were making their attack run on the Krynex battleships. These huge craft were protected by thick armor and powerful shields. It would take concentrated firepower to bring them down. Lieutenant Ben Parker led his bomber squadron toward the nearest battleship. His Hammer bomber was slower than the Raptor interceptors, but it carried 8 heavy torpedoes. Each torpedo was designed to punch through shields and cause massive internal damage. Hammer 6, this is Hammer lead," Ben called to his squadron. "Target the lead battleship. Spread your torpedoes across the entire hull. I want to overwhelm their shields." 12 bombers lined up for their attack run. The Krynex battleship saw them coming and began firing, but the human fighters had cleared most of the defensive ships. The bombers pushed through the defensive fire, and Ben watched 3 of his squadron get hit. 2 of them exploded immediately. The third limped away, trailing fire. "Stay on target," Ben ordered, his voice tight. The remaining 9 bombers released their torpedoes at the same time. 72 heavy torpedoes streaked toward the battleship, moving faster than the alien ship could track. They hit in a rolling wave of explosions, each one punching through the shields and blasting chunks out of the organic hull. The battleship shuddered and began to break apart, huge sections of it tearing away from the main body. Atmosphere and fluids vented into space. The massive ship listed to one side and stopped firing. "Splash 1 battleship," Ben reported, his voice shaking with adrenaline. On the Roosevelt, Captain Linda Hayes was coordinating her own fighter wings. Her carrier was engaging the Krynex forces on the opposite side of the colony, trying to give the civilian ships time to escape. "Ma'am, the civilian transports are lifting off," her communications officer reported. "But some of them are too slow. The Krynex are targeting them." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Launch the Spear gunships. Get them down to the surface and establish a defensive perimeter around the launch areas." 6 Spear-class gunships detached from the Roosevelt, each one carrying a platoon of Marines. These heavily armored craft looked like flying fortresses, bristling with weapons and thick armor plating. They were designed to survive atmospheric entry under fire and deliver troops directly into combat zones. Lieutenant Frank Cooper stood in the troop bay of his gunship, holding onto a ceiling strap as the craft shook from weapons fire. Around him, his platoon of 30 Marines checked their weapons and prepared for landing. They were all wearing powered armor that made them stronger and better protected than regular infantry. 60 seconds to touchdown, the pilot called back. Multiple hostiles around the landing zone. Looks like the Krynax sent ground forces to attack the colony directly. Frank looked at his Marines. Most of them were young, in their 20s, but they'd all been through extensive training. Listen up. We hit the ground fast and establish a perimeter. Our job is to keep those bugs away from the civilians until they can evacuate. Work in pairs, support each other, and don't try to be a hero. The gunship's weapons opened up, chain guns and rockets hammering the ground below. Frank could feel the craft slowing, the pilot bringing it to a hover about 10 meters above the surface. The side doors opened and ropes deployed automatically. "Go, go, go," Frank shouted. The Marines slid down the ropes in a practiced rush, hitting the ground and immediately spreading out. Frank was one of the last down, and as soon as his boots touched dirt, he could see the enemy. The Krynax ground forces were even more terrifying up close. They were huge, each one standing 3 meters tall on 6 blade-like legs. Their heads were covered in compound eyes that seemed to see in every direction at once. They moved with disturbing speed, scuttling across the ground like giant spiders. "Fire!" Frank ordered. 30 Marines opened up with their rifles, sending streams of armor-piercing rounds into the Krynax. The aliens were tough, their natural armor absorbing several hits before they went down. But the Marines had trained for this. They focused their fire, working in teams to bring down one alien at a time. Frank saw a Krynax charging toward a group of civilians who were trying to reach a transport ship. He raised his rifle and put 3 rounds through the creature's head cluster. It crashed to the ground, its legs still twitching. "Second squad, cover that transport," Frank called out. "Don't let anything get close to it." The Marines moved to obey, setting up defensive positions around the civilian ship. More transports were taking off all around them, their engines roaring as they climbed into the sky. But there were still dozens more on the ground, still loading frightened colonists. Above the planet, the space battle was reaching its peak. Human fighters had destroyed or disabled over 100 Krynax ships, but they were taking casualties too. Shaw had lost 4 of his 16 squadron members, though all 4 pilots had been recovered by the rescue ships that darted through the battle. "Gold lead, this is Tors," the air wing commander's voice came through. "We've taken down 3 of the 7 battleships, but the remaining 4 are concentrating their fire on our fighters. Losses are mounting." Shaw looked at his tactical display. She was right. The Krynax were learning from the battle, adapting their tactics. The remaining battleships had moved into a tight formation, supporting each other with overlapping defensive fire. "Tors, this is Gold lead. If we hit them one at a time, we'll lose too many bombers. We need to attack all 4 at once, overwhelm their defenses." There was a pause. Then Tors came back on. "Agreed. Stand by for new orders." On the Constellation, Morrison was having the same thought. "Tors, coordinate with the Lincoln and Roosevelt. I want every remaining bomber to form up for one massive strike. Hit all 4 battleships simultaneously, and tell the interceptor squadrons to provide close cover." "Yes, sir," Tors replied. Across 3 carriers, bomber squadrons began reorganizing. It was a complex maneuver, getting dozens of bombers from different ships to coordinate their attack. But these crews had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times. Ben Parker found himself leading a mixed group of bombers from all 3 carriers. There were 42 Hammer bombers in total, carrying over 300 torpedoes. If they could deliver their payload, the remaining battleships wouldn't stand a chance. "All bombers, this is Hammer lead," Ben called out. "We're going to hit them hard and fast. Interceptors will clear a path. When you see your target, release all torpedoes and get out. Don't hang around to watch the fireworks." Shaw and the other interceptor squadron leaders brought their fighters in ahead of the bombers, engaging the Krynax defensive fighters and clearing the way. It was dangerous work, and more fighters were getting hit, but they were buying the bombers time. "Bombers, you're clear," Shaw reported. "Give them hell." 42 bombers accelerated toward the 4 battleships. The Krynax saw them coming and concentrated all their fire on the incoming threat. Space became a deadly web of plasma bolts and energy beams. Ben watched as bombers started getting hit, exploding in brilliant flashes or spiraling away trailing smoke and fire. "Stay on target," he ordered again. knowing that some of his pilots wouldn't make it. But the majority did. 31 bombers released their torpedoes at almost the same instant. Nearly 250 heavy torpedoes crossed the space between the forces in a devastating wave. The Krynex battleships tried to shoot them down, tried to evade, but there were simply too many targets. The torpedoes hit like the hammer of an angry god. All 4 battleships were engulfed in explosions, their hulls rupturing from the inside out. 2 of them broke completely apart. The other 2 were left as burning wrecks, drifting and powerless. On the Constellation's bridge, the crew erupted in cheers as the tactical display showed the battleships going dark. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. Good work, but we're not done yet. There are still over 100 Krynex frigates out there, and our people on the ground need support. Katie looked up from her station. Sir, the last civilian transports are lifting off from the colony. All civilians have been evacuated. Tell Cooper and his Marines to pull back to the extraction point, Morrison ordered. I want them off that planet in the next 5 minutes. On the ground, Frank Cooper received the order with relief. His platoon had been fighting for 20 minutes and they were running low on ammunition. The Krynex kept coming in waves, seemingly endless. All Marines fall back to the landing zone, Frank called out. Leapfrog formation covering fire. The Marines began a controlled retreat, moving in groups while others provided covering fire. It was a difficult maneuver under pressure, but these were professional soldiers. They'd trained for this. The gunships came back down, their weapons blazing to keep the Krynex at bay. Marines scrambled aboard, dragging their wounded with them. Frank was the last one on, turning to fire a final burst at the pursuing aliens before diving through the door. We're all aboard, he reported to the pilot. Get us out of here. The gunships lifted off, climbing rapidly through the atmosphere while the Krynex fired uselessly at them from below. Within minutes, they were back in space and heading for the Roosevelt. Morrison watched the tactical display as the last of his ground forces reached safety. The civilian transports were clear too, having fled the system as fast as their engines could carry them. Sir, the Krynex ships are beginning to scatter, Palmer reported. Their hive mind must have decided the battle is lost. They're breaking formation and trying to escape. Morrison considered letting them go. His forces had won. The colony was saved and the civilians were safe. But he thought about all the other colonies the Krynex had attacked over the centuries, all the people they'd killed. All fighters pursue and destroy, he ordered. Don't let them regroup. The human fighters, still numbering over 1,000 despite their losses, spread out across the system. They hunted down the fleeing Krynex ships one by one, destroying them with missiles and cannon fire. The Krynex had the advantage of speed, but the human fighters had numbers and determination. It took another 40 minutes to finish the job. By the time it was over, only a handful of Krynex ships had managed to escape into faster-than-light travel. The rest were debris, floating in the cold vacuum of space. As the fighters began returning to their carriers, Morrison finally allowed himself to relax slightly. Status report. How many fighters did we lose? Lisa Grant pulled up the casualty list, her face somber. 92 fighters destroyed or damaged beyond recovery. But search and rescue has accounted for 81 pilots, 11 confirmed killed in action. Morrison felt the weight of those 11 deaths settle on his shoulders. 11 people who had woken up that morning not knowing it would be their last day. 11 families who would get terrible news. But he also thought about the thousands of colonists who were alive because of what his crews had done. What about the Lincoln and Roosevelt? Roosevelt lost 41 fighters, all pilots recovered. Lincoln lost 37 with 2 pilots still missing, but their beacons are active. Search and rescue is en route to their positions. Morrison nodded. Make sure those pilots get found. I want every single person accounted for. Katie spoke up. Sir, Ambassador Kelthrin is hailing us. His fleet just arrived in the system. Morrison straightened in his chair. Put him through. The screen showed Kelthrin standing on his ship's bridge, surrounded by other council members. They all looked shocked, staring at something off-screen. Morrison realized they were watching the battle damage assessment, seeing the wreckage of over 200 Krynex ships floating in space. Captain Morrison, Kelthrin said slowly, we arrived prepared to fight a desperate defensive battle. Instead, we find the Krynex fleet destroyed and the colony saved. How is this possible? Morrison gestured to the tactical display. We had 3 carriers, Ambassador. The Krynex had 200 ships. But we had 1,200 fighters. The math was in our favor. One of the other council members, Coordinator Vren, pushed forward. Your casualties, they must be catastrophic. We lost 170 fighters across all 3 carriers, Morrison replied. 11 pilots killed in action. The rest were recovered by our search and rescue ships. Vren's jaw literally dropped open. 170 fighters out of 1,200. That's barely 14% casualties. You destroyed over 200 enemy ships and lost only 14% of your forces. Morrison nodded. Our fighters are expendable, Coordinator. Our pilots are not. We build our entire doctrine around that principle. Every fighter has an ejection system. Every pilot wears a beacon. We have dedicated ships whose only job is to recover downed pilots. When a fighter gets destroyed, we lose a machine. We can build more machines, but the pilot usually survives to fly another day. Kelthrin seemed unable to process what he was hearing. The Krynex have been a terror to the Council for thousands of years. Our strategy has always been to evacuate and retreat, then spend months hunting down their scattered forces. You engaged them directly and defeated them in less than 2 hours. We had the advantage of numbers and tactics, Morrison said, and we had highly trained pilots who trusted each other and their equipment. But most importantly, we had carriers that could deploy overwhelming force quickly and sustain combat operations for as long as necessary. Speaker Lyra, the silver-skinned alien, appeared on the screen. Captain Morrison, our fleet includes hospital ships to treat your wounded. We also have supply ships that can provide whatever you need. Morrison appreciated the offer. Thank you, Speaker Lyra. We'll take you up on that. Our medical bays are full of injured pilots, and we've expended most of our missiles and torpedoes. Over the next few hours, Council ships and human ships work together to clean up the battlefield and search for survivors. The 2 missing pilots from the Lincoln were found alive, drifting in their ejection pods. Every human casualty was recovered and given proper respect. Morrison stood in the Constellation's observation deck, watching the recovery operations through the large windows. Lisa Grant came to stand beside him. Sir, the crew is asking about the fallen, she said quietly. Morrison nodded. We'll hold a memorial service tomorrow. Full honors for each of them. They gave their lives protecting people they'd never met. That deserves to be remembered. The pilots are calling this the Battle of Kelvin, Lisa added. They're saying it's the first time humans fought alongside the Council against a common enemy. Morrison considered that. Maybe that's what we needed. Not just diplomatic talks and tour of our ships, but actual proof that we're here to help. The Council has been worried about our military power. Now they've seen us use it to protect their people. Katie's voice came through the communication system. Sir, Ambassador Kelthrin is requesting a private conversation with you. Morrison headed back to the bridge and had the channel opened. Kelthrin appeared on the screen, alone this time. His expression was thoughtful. Captain Morrison, I have been authorized by the Council to make you an offer, Kelthrin said. The Council wishes to purchase Earth's carrier technology and training programs. We are prepared to pay handsomely. Morrison shook his head slowly. I appreciate the offer, Ambassador, but I don't think you understand what you're asking for. Our carriers aren't just technology. They're an entire military philosophy that took us 300 years to develop. You can't just buy that. Then what would you suggest? Kelthrin asked. Morrison thought for a moment. How about a joint training program? We'll help the Council develop their own carrier doctrine adapted to your species' strengths. We'll share what we know and you share what you know. That way we all get stronger together. Kelthrin's eyes blinked in sequence, the gesture Morrison now recognized as approval. That is an excellent proposal. I will present it to the Council immediately. But I must ask, Captain Morrison. Why are you so willing to share your military advantages with us? Morrison smiled. Because we're about to join the Council, Ambassador. That makes us allies, and allies help each other survive. Today, we helped you against the Krynex. Tomorrow, you might help us against some threat we haven't encountered yet. That's how alliances work. Your people are very different from what we expected, Kelthrin said softly. When we first saw your massive carriers and your huge fighter wings, we thought you might be conquerors. Instead, you are protectors." "We're both," Morrison admitted. "We have the power to conquer if we wanted to, but we learned the hard way that conquest only leads to more war. Protection and cooperation lead to peace. We'll take peace every time." After the conversation ended, Morrison walked through the carrier's corridors. Everywhere he went, crew members were busy. Mechanics were repairing damaged fighters. Supply officers were taking inventory of remaining weapons. Medical staff were treating wounded pilots. The ship hummed with purposeful activity. He stopped by the pilot-ready room where Danny Shaw and his squadron were being debriefed. They looked exhausted, still wearing their flight suits, but they were alive. That was what mattered. Shaw saw Morrison and stood up, bringing his pilots to attention. "As you were," Morrison said. "I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. What you did today saved thousands of lives." Amy Carter spoke up, her voice tired but proud. "Sir, it's what we trained for. We just did our jobs." Morrison nodded. "You did more than your jobs. You showed the galaxy what Earth's pilots are capable of. The Council will never look at us the same way again." As he left the ready room, Morrison thought about the future. Today had been humanity's first real test in galactic warfare, and they had passed with distinction. The Council had seen what carriers could do in the hands of well-trained crews. But Morrison also knew that the Krynax would be back someday. They always came back. And next time they would have learned from this defeat. They would adapt their tactics, bring more ships, try different strategies. That was fine. Humanity would be ready. They would train harder, build more carriers, develop new technologies. That was what humans did. They adapted, they improved, they overcame. Morrison returned to the bridge and looked at the tactical display one more time. It showed the positions of all three carriers and their escorts, the wreckage of the Krynax fleet, and the Council ships that had arrived to help. "Katie, send a message to Earth Command," he said. "Let them know that first contact with hostile forces was successful, all objectives achieved, and recommend that we accelerate the carrier construction program. Something tells me we're going to need them." "Yes, sir," Katie replied, already typing the message. Palmer looked up from his station. "Sir, what do you think happens now? Will the Council accept us?" Morrison smiled. "They already have, Greg, they just don't know it yet. After today, they can't afford not to accept us. We're too valuable as allies and too dangerous as enemies. The smart play is to bring us into the Council and benefit from our protection." "And if some species opposes us?" Palmer asked. Morrison shrugged. "Then we'll deal with it when it happens. But I'm betting that news of this battle will spread fast. Every Council species is going to hear about how 3 human carriers destroyed a Krynax fleet that would have required their entire navy to defeat. They're going to want us on their side." He was right. Over the next few days, as news of the Battle of Kelvin spread across Council space, humanity's application for membership was fast-tracked. Species that had been hesitant suddenly became enthusiastic supporters. The vote wasn't even close. 2 weeks later, Morrison stood on the Constellation's bridge as they approached the Council's central station for the formal acceptance ceremony. The massive station was surrounded by ships from every member species, all of them there to witness humanity's entry into the galactic community. "Sir, we're receiving landing clearance," Katie said. "They're directing us to the main diplomatic dock." Morrison nodded. "Take us in, nice and slow. Let everyone get a good look." The Constellation moved through the fleet of Council ships, dwarfing most of them. Behind her came the Lincoln and the Roosevelt, equally impressive. Fighter squadrons from all 3 carriers flew escort, moving in perfect formation. On the Council station, beings from dozens of species watched the human ships arrive. Some were awed by their size. Others were frightened by their obvious power, but all of them respected what those ships represented. Earth had arrived in the galaxy, not with threats or demands, but with a willingness to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. They had shown their strength and their restraint in equal measure. They had proven themselves worthy allies. Ambassador Kelthrin stood at the docking port, ready to greet Morrison personally. When the human captain emerged from his ship, Kelthrin bowed in the traditional Council greeting. "Welcome, Captain Morrison," Kelthrin said. "Welcome to the Galactic Council. We are honored to count humanity among our members." Morrison returned the bow. "Thank you, Ambassador. We're honored to be here, and we're ready to do our part in keeping the peace. As the formal ceremonies began, Morrison thought about all the pilots and crew members who had made this possible, the ones who had trained for years without knowing if they'd ever see real combat, the ones who had fought at Kelvin and proven the value of Earth's carrier doctrine, the 11 who had given their lives protecting strangers. This was their victory as much as his. They had brought the age of carriers to the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. High above the council station, fighter squadrons from 3 carriers continued their escort patrol, moving in perfect coordination. They were a symbol of Earth's power, but also of Earth's commitment to protection rather than conquest. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. In space, numbers and coordination mattered more than individual ship power, and humanity had built an entire navy around that principle. The Krynax would return someday. Other threats would emerge from the darkness between the stars, but now the galaxy had Earth's carriers standing watch, ready to launch their fighters at a moment's notice. And that made all the difference.